Hello Algebra 1 students, this is Mr. Wilsey, and in this video we are going to be learning how to write and solve systems of equations. Now notice that the key word here is writing systems of equations. And we're going to be writing systems of equations from contextual problems, from real world problems. Now you need two things in order to watch this video. You need this sheet of paper here, which I should have given you in class. And you also need some kind of paper, like notebook, to write additional notes on as well. So let's take a look at the first problem that I want to try to tackle using this, what is this? This 5-step method. Okay? So the first problem is, in a talent show of singing and comedy acts, singing acts are 5 minutes long and comedy acts are 3 minutes long. The show has 12 acts and lasts 15 minutes. How many singing acts and how many comedy acts are in the show? Now this is a perfect example of a contextual problem that you can solve using systems of equations. Now the basic idea is that we are going to write two equations and we are going to find the solution of that system of equations using the methods that we've learned so far, either graphing or substitution. Now, let's look at what the first step of this 5-step method is. The first step is to identify the two unknowns. What are we trying to find? What do we want to know? Now, in this case, the key word is two unknowns. In the types of systems of equations that we're going to be solving in this class, there's usually going to be two things that we don't know and want to find. Now we're going to let our unknowns be x and y, but we need to identify what x and y represent in the context of the problem. So let's look up here. What are we trying to find? Well, we're trying to find the number of singing acts and the number of comedy acts are in this show. So those are the two unknowns, the two things that we want to find. So let's let x represent either one of those. Let's say number of singing acts. And then let's let y represent the number of comedy acts. Now you are filling out this sheet of paper with me, okay? And of course make sure to put your name up here, so in case you lose the paper. Alright, that wasn't too bad. Now let's look at step 2. List any numbers you see in the problem. So let's look back up here, and let's try to identify some numbers that we might use in the equations that we're going to write. Well, let's see, there's a 5. There's a 3, there's a 12, 50, and that's about it. So there's 4 numbers in this problem. So let's write them down over here. Let's also write down the unit, if there's any unit associated with that number. So that means that we're going to write, let's see, the first number might be 5 minutes. The second number was 3 minutes. And then 12 acts and 50 minutes. 12 acts and 50 minutes. Okay? So acts, in this case, is a type of unit, just like you know that minutes is a unit of measure for time. Okay? Basically, the idea is that we don't want to lose meaning from these numbers. Okay? Alright, now let's look at step 3. Step 3 is the hard part. Let's try to find some way to combine x, y, 5, 3, 12, and 50. Now, isn't it true that the number of singing acts plus the number of comedy acts equals 12? Because that's the total number of acts. So the way that we're going to write that equation is x plus y equals 12. And that is our first equation. But we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of what this equation represents. So we're going to write it down explicitly what that equation means. The best way to write that might be the total number of x. Okay? Now the second equation that we're going to write is also going to involve x and y and maybe some of these other numbers. Now this 5 minutes, remember, that represents the length of each singing act. And 3 minutes represents the length of each comedy act. So let's add that in, because that might be some important information. 3 minutes per comedy act, 5 minutes per singing act. Now, if that's the case, how can we combine 5, 3, 50, and x and y in order to write a new equation? Well, how about this? If each singing act is 5 minutes, and we multiply that by the number of singing acts, 5x, doesn't 5x represent the total amount of time taken up by the singing acts? So if you had 2x, 5 times 2 is 10 minutes for the whole singing act portion of the show. Now let's do the same exact thing with the comedy acts. 5x plus 3 minutes per comedy act times the number of comedy acts gives the total amount of time spent on comedy. And then 5x plus 3y, that represents the whole length of the show, which is equal to 50 minutes. So this right here is our second equation, and it represents the total, how about the total length of time of the show. Now notice that there is a key word in both of these equations about what they represent, and this is going to give you a clue when you're doing problems on your own. This equation represents the total number of something. This equation also represents the total number of something. Usually, not always, but usually that's going to be the case. So when you're doing these types of problems, try to identify some way to write an equation that represents the total amount of something. The total amount of something. So now we have really completed all of the hard work. We now have a system of equations. Let me write out what that is again. X plus y equals 12, and 5x plus 3y equals 50. Now this is a system of equations, and you learned two different ways, at least two different ways, to solve this system of equations. So pick one and solve it. What I think I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to choose to solve this solve this system of equations by substitution. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to rewrite the equation that we came up with over here, x plus y equals 12. Now this one was 5x plus 3y equals 50. Alright, so in order to solve this system of equations by substitution, I need to solve one of the equations for one of the variables. This equation is going to be the easiest to solve. I could solve it for x or for y. It doesn't matter. For example, if I want to solve it for y, all I have to do is subtract x. So y equals 12 minus x. That's really easy, right? That's not too bad at all. Now, in order to substitute, I'm going to take 12 minus x, and I'm going to go into the other equation, and I'm going to replace this y with 12 minus x inside of parentheses. Okay? If you recall from the other video, in which I taught you how to solve by substitution. So that means the next line over here is going to be 5x plus 3 times, in parentheses, equals 50. The thing inside of parentheses is 12 minus x. There we go. Now I have one equation with just one variable. Y has disappeared from this equation. Now let's solve it. The first step to solving this equation is going to be to distribute. So I'm going to distribute the 3 into the parentheses. 3 times 12 is 36. 3 times negative x is negative 3x. All right. Now the next step could be, let's say, subtract 36. The reason I did that is that now 5x minus 3x are next to each other. 50 minus 36 is 14. 5x minus 3x, let's combine like terms. That is equal to 2x equals 14. And then the final step to solving this equation is to divide both sides by 2. So x equals 7. Oh my goodness, that was so much work, right? We're done. No, absolutely not. We found an x. Now we need to find a y. So x is 7. Now the easiest thing to do is to just take this and plug it in to the other equation, because then we can easily calculate what y is. Y is equal to 12 minus x. We just found that x has a value of 7, so 12 minus 7 means that y is 5. And then I'm going to box this. So now we have a solution to our system of equations. But we're not quite done yet. Remember that our original problem was a word problem. So that means that our answer also needs to be in words. It needs to be a complete sentence. And that's what step 5 means. Interpret your answer in the context of the problem. So x was 7. X represents the number of singing acts. So there are 7 singing acts in this show. So write this out. There are 7 singing acts and 5 comedy acts in the show. All right, and that is it. We are done with this problem.